Right, that's badly pitted. My original plan, up until 5 minutes ago, was to actually cut it there, fit an inline coupler and new brake hose, because this is actually pretty good as far as I could see, but getting in here to cut it, complicated. Don't go there. My whole pipe cutter is broken now. Hacksaw job, not ideal, but hacksaw in that. There's a small amount of pitting there. But anyway, I've just taken the under tray off, and I'm glad I did. God help us. God help us. This pipe here looks like it's probably been fretting against the bodywork. Yeah, and it's rotten. That's where it goes along there and up into the wheel arch, but as we come along here we get into good metal. I'm probably going to come somewhere around here to cut it. Easy access, well, easier, but that is shocking, frightening. I was almost not going to take this cover off underneath. I thought, well, I've got to jack the car up a bit higher. It's only 6 nuts that hold the whole tray on. Let's have a look. More to follow, I think. Just a word on eBay fittings. This was the first, happened to be the first one I got out of the pack. I think this is important. The hole is blatantly, this isn't going to show it very well, but it's blatantly off centre. It's appalling. They're not all like that. The threads, they're galled, they're rough. UK supplier, good feedback, but brakes, just how important are they? This is my temporary stop end. This one, the hole is in centre, and when I cut the pipe, I'm going to flare the end. Obviously, put a fitting on first. Put the female on, or the male. Flare the pipe, and then I'll cap it with the inline coupler with, let's call it a stop end. That gives me time then to remove the rusty pipe, take it to the bench, and then form up the new section. I'm not a big fan of laser. I'm sure they do some good tools. You get what you pay for, I suppose, but because I'm using conifer, spelt with either a C or a K, depending on where you go to buy it, it's much tougher than copper. Lots of videos about the different materials. It's actually got just the barest hint of ferrous in it, so they do claim that this stuff is pretty much as good as copper in terms of corrosion resistance, but it's a lot tougher to flare. So you need to make sure when you buy these flaring tools they will say for copper, aluminium, blah blah blah. This one does conifer and steel, and even then it's pretty hard going. 17mm spanner and special grease. So a bit like a surgeon, I'm waiting to do the first incision to make the cut in the pipe. So I'm going to procrastinate a little bit further, make sure I've got all my tools ready. But the most important thing is once I've cut the pipe, I've disconnected, oh, it's a Mercedes by the way, with the SBS system. So I've actually disconnected the main and auxiliary battery. I do have some software that will enable me to deactivate the SBS. Wasn't satisfied it was doing that when I deactivated it, because I did a few pedal presses and I heard the pump kick in. Go figure. So anyway, the next stage is to make the incision, clean the pipe, deburr it, fit the fitting, flare the end, and then fit the inline coupler that will be used, but with my temporary stop end. Stop the fluid leaking out. Right, I've spared you the details of flaring well, cutting and flaring the pipe underneath. We've now got to remove this bit. I'm going to replace the flexible hose, 11mm, and that's a 6.11mm socket. It's done very little work, but it's not a very good fit. The side of the brake hose has flutes either side, and I'm assuming therefore there are, in the hole, there's a couple of slots. That means I can't grip this and turn that. There are two flats on the underside because of the flutes. Certainly on the new hose it's got two flutes, and I can see the flutes. Sorry. I'm looking at what I'm doing and not looking at the camera. Anyway, this is going to be a bit of a challenge. Worst case is I'm going to grind. I've got two replacement clips anyway. I can grind that clip off. Then I can get hold of the two flats on the brake hose, and then mould grips time perhaps, but we'll figure it out as we go along. Happy days. I knew I couldn't get in there with a socket. You can't really see, but this would fail, so I had this little breaker bar, and that has actually cracked it. Annoyingly, on these cheaper sockets you'll notice that you've got this horrible chamfer, which means when you've got a very shallow head nut or bolt, you're already losing a couple of mil, or a mil or so, as a result of the internal chamfer. So I sometimes grind them down flush. Every millimetre counts. But anyway, let's just verify that. Yeah, she's away. Onwards and upwards. Cup of tea time, I think. Just to finish off in here, rather than two slots, when you think about it, we've got a series of serrations, because when you tighten this flexible hose up, if you only had two slots, depending on the threading on the hose, you'd end up with the slots 90 degrees out of phase, and you'd end up having to twist the hose in order to get it to line up into the two slots. So that's why we've got all these serrations. And yeah, you can, well, you'll see on the new hose. We'll do a trial fit, obviously, give that a clean up. Right, confession time. When I cut the pipe underneath, I stupidly, this is where the cut was, and this is where it was up, joins the flexible brake hose. Basically cut the pipe and I swung it out of the way, so I've now destroyed the alignment, so I'm going to have to temporarily fit this back and put it back in, because this is obviously my template. But anyway, that's another error that I've made. But it's very odd the way, you see this part here, that actually gets pretty much spray off of the wheels. That's pretty good. And then it goes down into the bottom of the wheel arch, and then from here it's pretty much out of sight, and this is underneath the plastic under tray. So this is much more exposed than down here, and that's really scabby, and particularly bad there. Turn that over. Just have a look at the way that's been pickling. That's actually facing into the centre of the car, so that's not the top or the bottom, but it's almost as if, well, there's a reason for it. I don't know what it is, life's too short, but basically I'm going to temporarily refit this, push it back into alignment, and I think that's what I'm going to do. I've had enough for one day. This is not a how-to, this is how I mean, this is the first time I've ever tackled a brake pipe job. I've never had the tools. I've had cars with rusty pipes over the years, and I don't know, I just never never thought they were bad enough. I've always cleaned them up and made good, but so this is the first time for me, so it's a big learning curve. I do know my way around cars, but as I say, I may even disable comments because I'm sure there's a lot of people that obviously do this regularly, got more experience than me, and they'll be throwing their phones at the computer screen. So anyway, more to continue. Just a little bit on how this works, because I was pretty confident I knew how it worked before I bought it, because I'd seen 1 or 2 videos and explained how it all works. But basically this tool will either do SAE flares or DIN flares, DIN ISO. We're working on DIN because that's what European cars and more modern British cars use. Old British cars, American cars, they would use the SAE 3/16. One thing I noticed, I've done 3 flares on this, a couple of test flares and the one that I've done under the car, and they supply grease with it. This is not, there's normally 3 bolts in here when I reassemble it, but I just had a look inside and we've got some residue of grease on both halves. The pipe comes in here and then the former is wound in from that side. If that grease cannot be displaced, if it has nowhere to go, you will not compress it, and that surely is going to have an effect on the shape of the flare. I think it is important to have a lubricant because you are using friction to create the flare, but I think I'm going to use some very light oil. That's just an observation. I'll clean that up before I use it. In fact, I'm going to do that now because I need to do my first flare on the new pipe. The way it works is if you're using DIN, you screw the handle into the SAE and Vicky Verky. It's upside down, apologies for that, but our pipe's going to come in from the right hand side and we've got a datum point. So first thing we do is we put in our stop end, we feed the pipe in, and then we tighten down the 3 nuts, and that will securely clamp the pipe. We then remove the stop and then we wind in the former, as I call it, and that's what's going to smash bang wallop the end of the pipe to form the flare. So that gets screwed in there all the way until the shoulder comes down on the face. The pipe has to be straight to go in here. We're using, well, this is 3/16 pipe slash 4.76, that's what it says on the packet, but 3/16 or 4.75, which is the metric equivalent, they're interchangeable. So I've got a straight section. The reason I'm doing the flare first, let's get the fitting on, is because on the original pipe, as you can see, it's only, let's say it's about 1 inch, 25 mm, it's probably a bit more. I need to put in a lot more of a straight pipe on that. So if I go through the process of making all my lovely bends and then come to do the swage, I won't be able to get the tool on. I won't have enough pipe. Yes, I can straighten it back out again, and I just don't want to do that. Every time you bend these pipes, they will work hard. And this is the bit that the MOT inspector sees in the wheel arch. And I want that to look factory fresh when it goes on the car with the new hose. On the subject of these fittings, I'm not going to take that one off because I know I'll forget to put it back on, but some are better than others. I'm sure they're fit for purpose, but this is a Paget hose bought yesterday. I mean, it's almost as if that's been turned in a lathe. It's a different profile on this because this is a different type of fitting, but absolutely perfect. And the same at this end. It's, you know, that's what you would expect for brakes. I'm sure these are fine. I don't know, but oh, and that's the other thing I've noticed on these male fittings. Some of them are actually slightly domed on the end, and some of them are flat. They're all over the place, but they work. They'll definitely work with soft copper. Hopefully they'll work with conifer. But I think if you were using steel, factory steel brake lines, I think you could run into problems. Anyway, let's assemble the pipe and get it clamped down into the tool, and then we'll form a flare and see what it looks like. Right, fitting is on, pipe is in, up against my stop. A miscus of oil, flick some of that off. These are 10mm AF bolts, they're done up nice and tight. Will prevent the pipe from pushing out. That's coming up. 50% chance of getting the ratchet the right way first time. That doesn't take too much effort. Starting to get a bit tighter, but still manageable. Almost there. That's it. There's a sort of a coloration on that tool. It's really brunelled into the end of the pipe. Let's see what it looks like. Now that's the other thing, when you're going to do, if you're doing this on the car, because I've got a swaged end, I've got to separate the tool. And it got messy yesterday because fluid was drip, 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 drip. Fully removing, but so this is not what the trade would use in a garage anyway. I quite like that. Yeah, go on, it won't focus. But it's not a very good camera, this, I do apologise. It's a Sony, it's not a phone, it's a Sony CyberShot. I've had it quite a few years. Let's get it outside, let's get some real light. Ah, my mate's turned up, we'll be back in a sec. It's still not going to focus, but I'm pretty happy with that. Anyway, it's tea time, so get the brew on. Alright, let's get this finished. Pipe is in, bolted down. Drop of oil. God help us if this doesn't work. Well, it will work, but if it looks rubbish, I'll show you the other end. That came out really well earlier. Right, 50% chance of getting the ratchet on right. Bloody thing will not focus. But I'm happy with that. That was the earlier one, the one I did this morning. I'm happy with that as well. Anyway, proof will be in the pudding if it doesn't link. So that's what we're having to fit. Talk about spaghetti. Part of the reason why down this end, where's the under tray? This is the under tray, goes under the cart. This comes into the lower wheel arch. The brake pipe's got to go around here, then along the bodywork, and then out to where the join is. So we've got a mounting stud there, and I think this is why the original pipe, I've washed this off, was really badly corroded in various sections, because it was obviously a mud, well, there wasn't much mud in there, but whatever was getting in just wasn't drying out. So anyway, final phase, let's fit it, and then we've got to do the bleed. Right, well, thankfully I did take a couple of photos before I removed the original pipe. Although the shape's not identical, this isn't touching, it is clear on the back face, that's about 3mm, and it doesn't want to touch. Once the wheel arch liner is in, but the only thing you'll see, I think, is a little bit of that. Not even sure you'll see that. Well, we'll find out. So this is one of these unsatisfying jobs, an awful lot of work. Spent about an hour and a half bending this up. New hose, new clip. Let's have a look underneath. Don't need that. Right, so get our bearings. That's the offside rear, which is where it's tied into, and that brake line disappears towards the front of the car. There's the new section, and this stud is where this part of the under tray, so the pipe comes around here and then goes along the inner sill. So that took a lot of fettling. I'm not happy about that. That is up against the under sill. I'm going to try bending that, I think, in a little while. Everything's bolted up, everything's tight. So, yeah, God, what a lot of work. And I've got the other side to do yet. I think that's going to be different on the other side. I think the routing is slightly different. Anyway, time for a cup of tea. And this spread of this plate, very important. I did squeeze that in the vise because that made it taller, and the nut is what compresses it down, so the legs splayed out again, and that is on the shelf. It's not going to go anywhere, but these are wider than the factory originals. Big deal. But if that was to dislodge, although mechanically it's sealed, hydraulically this will then rattle, this will then flex, work hard, and could then possibly rub down here. It's just a bit of marker pen, and so on and so forth. And I think these yellow tracer wires, correct me if I'm wrong, are to make sure that you haven't got a twist in the pipe. Obviously it screws in onto the caliper and you've got no control. You just keep winding that in till it goes up good and tight, and then you just got to carefully bring the hose up without putting a rotational twist on it. And that these yellow marker lines, I think they just are a visual guide that you haven't got a twist, which is a no-no for the MOTs and for safety. Right, I'm going to bleed the brake, rear offside brake, before I do the other side. At the moment both the auxiliary battery that lives down here under the cabin filter and the main battery are disconnected, so just connected that up. Going to do the main battery next, fire up the laptop, and we'll see how we get on with brake bleeding. I've not done it before, as I say, this is all new to me. We can share the pain. Fluid level currently, I have noticed, I'd say that was, if it's condensation, then what I think I might do is extract all the fluid out of that, but we'll come back to that. I'm going to get the batteries on, connected up, get my fast charger connected up, fire up the laptop, and then we'll have a look at the fluid situation. I might syringe all that out because I don't really want to be pulling all that, if that is old mucky fluid. And I got a feeling on the service records it has had a fluid change, but quite a few years ago, so it's probably due a fluid change, so I might extract all that. As I say, I've got a fresh litre of fluid, so that should hopefully be enough. Yeah, in the process of disconnecting the batteries, this car, like the saloons, has it's an estate, and it has a soft close. So you disconnect the battery from the back of the car and then you shut the tailgate and it will only latch, it won't soft close. Now that's fine unless you're expecting rain overnight, so I had to do it from inside the car. And I could have got, you're supposed to undo the negative, but I could only get to the positive, so that's just another 10 minutes on the job, so we'll get that connected back up. Right, well, the software didn't work. I can actually, it's all been kicking off, the red lights, the buzzers. With ignition on, engine running, I can actually just manually bleed it by putting my foot on the brake, and I don't like the look of that. Look at that, that's bloody awful. So I've been extracting the reservoir. That holds about 10 litres, and I can't, there's just a little bit left down the bottom there. Can't get that out because Mercedes engineers have deliberately put baffles in there so that I can't completely empty the master cylinder out. The last lot that I've got out, it's not as dark as it looks on the camera, but that's actually, I'm going to say, cloudy. Up until the last knock-ins it was a bit lighter in colour than that, and clear, but that's definitely Is that water? Bloody hope not. What a carry-on. Right, I've got a litre of fresh fluid, so we're going to put that in. Can't get, I don't know whether that's for the front circuit or the rear circuit. I don't know how they've designed this. We got two, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to put some fresh fluid in and pump through. I'll empty that out until we get some clean fluid. Well, I think I got there. Software, I use Maxi ECU software with the Mercedes add-on. I got that ages ago because it allowed me to code the injectors. It works fine. It's got a lot of other features in there, but anyway, it don't want to do anything with the SBS brake system. So I basically let it bleed itself. Just get my thoughts in order. What I ended up doing is tube on the bleed nipple, tube in jar. I've got through 2/3 of a litre of brake fluid. Actually, probably about half a litre, because I completely emptied, or pretty much emptied, the master cylinder, and there's probably about 1/4 of a litre in there. Just wait for that noisy piece of shit to go by. All 5 horsepower. Yeah, so what you do is you put your tube in the jar, you loosen off the bleed nipple, if you turn the ignition on and push the brake pedal, the SBS system goes into cardiac arrest, because what it's detecting is a major problem on one of the brake circuits. So it immediately shuts the valve off, and you can push that brake pedal as many times as you like and no fluid will come out. So switch the ignition off, leave the bleed nipple open, turn the ignition back on, and for several seconds the SBS pump will not purge, but it will be pumping through fluid, a good amount of fluid into the jar, and then it goes into cardiac arrest again. Tighten up the bleed nipple, top up the master cylinder reservoir, repeat the process. So I've got clean fluid coming through now, and everything's tightened up, got no leaks underneath, and got no problems with the SBS system. Run the engine, no errors. Pump the brake pedal a few times. I hear the pump cut back in again to recharge it. No errors. Now only time will tell, of course, but I've had enough for one day. I mean, like I say, there's very little to show for it, other than the fact that I don't have rusty brake lines. So I suppose that's one thing to be content about. I've just, no fires here, I've just hosed off, taken the opportunity to hose out the wheel arch, particularly in here. Absolute, I didn't think there was any mud in there because it was so solid, but went in there with the high pressure hose all around the arch and in the back here as well. I'm not going to keep this car for very much longer, but wheel arches, well, they're already going here. That's easy enough, being as it's black paint work. I can quite easily take care of that, but I wanted to get all the mud and rubbish out. There was a big layer of mud in here. Brake discs will be, well, they're overdue. There's still enough meat on the pads, but the discs are very worn. But that's a job for another time. That's an easy enough job. So tomorrow, repeat performance on the other side. Hopefully it'll take me a lot less time, because it's been a big learning curve today. So onwards and upwards, time for a brew. Oh dear. Not so bad this side. Half of it, well, I've replaced about half as much as I did on the other side. This is all still got the factory finish on it. Put brush applied wax oil and everything. No real drama on this side, took, as I hoped, a fraction of time. A little bit of collateral damage on my finger, but can't complain. These are the tools all of the tools that I use to do this job from start to finish. In the wheel arch you've got some blind rivets and 10mm plastic nuts, so trim removal tool. It's very helpful. That pretty much goes with that. But everything else, 11 and 13mm spanners for the hydraulic fittings, small ratchet 1/4 inch 8 and 10mm for getting the wheel arch liner out, some marker pens, as in the video, 11mm socket without a ratchet, you want a Tommy bar. If you try and undo the brake rigid pipe to flexible pipe fitting with a open-ended spanner, if they're like mine, badly rusted, then it just doesn't work. So as I did in the video, I cut the pipe off and then I could come in with a, again, you really want a 6-point socket, and it just cracked it nice and saved a lot of time and trauma. 1 litre of ATE, brake bleeding stuff. I used light oil, good old 3-in-1, rather than the grease. As I mentioned in the video, I was getting a build-up of grease inside there. You just make sure, use the grease, just clean the fitting out every time. And then I looked at what it's actually cost. Oh, and just a jig, always helpful to have a vise. This allowed me to create some nice even bends without the pipe kinking. If I knew that it was going to take me 2 full days and cost me 161 parts, next time I'll pay a garage. The flare tool was the most expensive. It's a laser 6728, £75.20. These prices have got VAT included. 2 Paget hoses from Euro Car Parts was £42, plus a litre of ATE. Branded fluid was £8.60. Big difference in brake fluid prices depending on, I think there was one there, I don't know whether it was Duckham's or Girling, it was like 18 quid or something for a litre. Various fittings, I've rounded it up, 20 quid. The all important conifer pipe, 25 feet, 16 quid, and that came with some fittings as well. The whole lot was £161.80. You would want to allow labour and fluid to get it done bled properly on the star system, and I reckon that could cost you up to 120. So you're looking at just under £300. Mate of mine, he had a CLK. In fact, he's had 2 CLKs, and on both of those he's had the rear brake pipes fitted, and they obviously fit the complete lines, lower the rear differential suspension assembly, and I think somewhere around about £600 or whatever. So by doing it yourself, yes, you're going to save some money, but as I say, with the aggro I had with the fittings, next time I'll pay the professionals to do it. Part of the problem was the sheer length that I had to replace on the offside. That's about 3 foot of pipe. Near side, and I didn't cut corners, much shorter section, much easier to form the new section. What I did find though is I had to do, the first flare I did on the near side was awful and it leaked. So I thought I'd do a test flare on the original steel pipe that I cut off. And again, you can't see it unfortunately in the camera, but this green plastic coating is a bit of a problem. It's getting in the way. There's some bits caught on that. So what I ended up doing is I cut the first flare off that I wasn't happy with as close to the end, and then I used some very fine wet and dry and removed this green plastic coating. Second flare turned out beautiful. So again, if I was to do it again, I didn't do that on the offside yesterday, but I've got no leaks, so yeah. So the only special tool is just the flaring tool, and I'll probably never use it again. Well, I probably will on another car. I think with the Mercedes, I think they are complicated because of all the bends, and in terms of the height of the car, that's the minimum height. I would actually have found the job a lot easier if I'd gone probably 2 or 3 inches higher. But the wheel arch liners are in, the whole job's done. All I've got to do is fit the 2 under trays. I'm going to run the engine up, really stamp on the brake pedal, satisfy myself that the fittings aren't leaking, and then I'll get the job wrapped up. But it's actually taken me 3 days in total. The first day I hadn't budgeted on replacing the flexible hoses, so I had to go out and collect those. So that cost me an extra hour, and there was lots of procrastination. But doing the near side today, did it in a fraction of the time, because I knew what needed to be done, I knew the order in which to do it, and I knew what to expect. So time will tell.